Welcome everyone. Today I'm going to discuss on climate change and its impact, and most important thing is that how climate change play a major role in our present life. And I want to come up with one of the example from developing nations, how and why the climate is changing. Introductions to the climate change and science and climate change, cause of climate changing, climate interactions, flood, drugs, and cyclone, impact of climate change on people and the environment, introductions to the climate change impact, sea level rise, climate change and water resources, climate change and food security, climate change and human health, climate change and terrestrial ecosystem. Uh, Response to climate change and forest management, climate change and water resources, principle and practices of the climate change, uncertainty in climate change and ecosystems, effective communications in climate change. Acknowledgements. There are different kind of things we can discuss on issues, and now we want to discuss on at the end of this lessons students will be able to describe the disease likely to be exacerbated by climate change from local, regional, and global perspective, identify the most valuable people and the population, those whose health could be affected by climate change, propose possible adaptations to climate change related human health issues, risk and problem. South Asia is a disaster prone. The most vulnerable people, climate sensitive health outcome, exacerbating current burdens of disease, general adaptation for the health sector, discussion questions. There are different kind of key reference we are observing from there. There is a book that South Asia, down the head climate extreme regional impact and the cases of the resilient. Further assigned readings. What are the most important human health impact in Bangladesh? Why? What can be done to reduce or mitigate the risk of to human health of this impact? Who is responsible for making the adaptation? More extreme weather events, storms, cyclone, flooding, health wave, more frequent, hotter and longer, rapid glacier melting, handslide, flash floods, and reduced water availability, disrupted rainfall patterns, more droughts, more extreme principal event, more intense rainfall, flood, and disrupted water supply, sea level rise, inundations. Saltwater interactions, loss of land and assets, increase coastal flood frequently, air pollution, increase in level of ground ozone, more aligned, more mortality related to the climate change by 2000. Health impact of the climate change, deliver to process. There is a climate change, and we have observing adapting capacity, mitigating capacity, mitigations, greenhouse and other things. We have regional waters, what were extreme temperature predictions, modeling. We have headwater temperatures, extremes, air pollution, water vectors, effective manuals. Microbials, transmission, agros, and everything we have. Beside that, for the health impact, health system conditions, social condition, environment conditions, climate change, direct exposure, indirect exposure, social and economic interrupted. Direct exposure, injury, disability, and drown and heat, indirect disease, waters and food borne diseases, malnutrition, vector borne disease, air pollutions, psychological stress. Southeast Asia regions is vulnerable to climate sensitive health stress. Indonesia, Maldives, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Philippines, many countries will be affected for this climate. Indonesia, three flood event, four landslide. Maldives, high tide floods. Everywhere it's happening. Climate change vulnerability index we are observing from here, and human exposure to tropical cyclone from 1970 to 2030 we are observing. Human exposure in the flood we are observing from different aspect actually happening. Projected human impact of the sea level rise. 2005, 3.9 million people in the sea rise exposed to flood causes by storm sugars and the sea level rise. Estimated 28 million people to be affected in the sea rise and by the projections of the 50 centimeter sea level rise. Asset exposure project 2009 increased between 2005 to 2017 with no adaptation measure. Flood projection Ho Chi Minh, Bangkok's, Manila, everywhere we can do some things. Additional reason for sea rising in population factor, popular factor affecting the risk. The most vulnerable are those who have less capacity to cope up with the climate change effect. Who is vulnerable to climate health stress? Children, women, elderly, pregnant women, disabled, and the sick people and the poor. The most vulnerable people in Asia region will be the poor, the rural area. Women are increasingly becoming household heads and they have the double burden of the social, reproductions, and agricultural world. Pregnant women, people living sustainable housing and water systems. Uh, Generalization about climate change vulnerability of the human population. Vulnerability high ADAS population, low resources for disaster and emergency resources, overall allocated populated inadequate water supply, sustainable housing and sanitations, low diversity of agriculture, cropping system, high proportions of the women and children in the proportions, population with sincere existing problem. Vector bonds, estimated death due to climate change, historical fatalities due to disaster, 30 years of fatalities and people affected by disasters, diseases that climate change might affect, directions and magnitudes of change selecting of the selected health impact of the climate change. Very high confidence malaria curtain and expansion changes in the transhumanization, high confidence increase in malnutrition, increase in the number of the people suffering from death, disease and injuries from extreme weather, even increase in the frequent of cardiorespiratory disease from changes in air quality, change in the range of interested disease vector regulations, cold water medium conditions, increase in the burden of diarrhea disease, more injuries, more extreme Southeast Asian weathers. Lead cause of the child death in the many Asian countries, more than 175,000 people and teenagers die from dying each other. Children under the age of 5 years are most at risk. Most drown event happen in and around home. Heat-related mortality, heat case, heat carpus, heat exhaustion, heat strokes, diarrhea, and exacerbations in the climate in chills. Extreme heat event and mortality. Risk factor for the hyperism is underlying medicine conditions, income and poverty status, social isolation, access to healthcare and cooling facilities, neighboring characteristics, land use or the land cover, crime rate, housing type, urban heat island, substrate housing and the water systems. 2006 Andhra Pradesh, India heat wave with temperatures up to 54%. Identify thermal extreme with the metallurgy and the health impact. More respiratory infect, air pollution, meeting increase energy, increase allegations. Round allegation production increase with increase in CO2 concentrations. Diarrhea disease account 20.1% decrease in the 5 years. There is a forest, agriculture, and fishery resources. Cope yield and the could decrease up to 30% in the increase and the soils by the mile 21 first century. Population growth and urbanization will magnify with the manipulations and the risks of hunger. Proportion mortality among children under 5 years of age. Vector bonds, urban population, vector, surveillance, reproduction, beatings, pathogen, survival, transmitter, reflection is host. Combined with alternative rainfall patterns, voting condition may increase the spread of disease such as malaria, dengue, and diphtheria. Warm temperature disrupted rain patterns could, after the disruptions of the disease vectors. Climate change and mosquito bonds tend to increase the range and incidents. Climate to titles. Falciparum and vivex. And beside that, we are observing model of interaction, strategy inventions, level of inventions, dengue fevers, actually heavily climate change affected. Adaptation for the health sector, further development emergency and medical services, further develop disaster response capacity, improve climate sensitive disaster surveillance and control, improve safe water supply and sanitations, improve health sanitations, explain and ensure safe water supplies and improve sanitations, education citizen of the risk and responses to the climate related health issue, address poverty, education and gender inequality. Take home message. The SEA region has a large population and the large population that is currently vulnerable to a number of climate sensitive health issues. These sessions are already having climate sensitive health issues. These sectors are already having a significant adverse health impact in the region. Climate change is the key of increase the risk linked to this stress and introduction new source of risk. Without adaptation and mitigation, climate change could result in dramatically increased health burden in the region. Much can be done now to adapt and repeat that will improve the health millions. Discussion questions. Where is the most vulnerable area in your country that affect by climate change? Who are the most vulnerable in our community? In your community, what illness and disaster that always occur happen caused by climate change? Discussions. What are you adapting to? Who adapts and who is vulnerable? Vulnerable. How do we adapt? What do we want to achieve? There are different kind of video exercise, code, virus, and many things happens, and we have to be very much careful, and we have to understand that we have to very much effective in an professional way. So if you have any kind of question regarding climate change and climate change related things, you can directly communicate with World Talent Economy Forum, and definitely we're going to help you to grow these things in an effective way. Thank you.